A big show coming up today, but first an unfolding and still developing story about the vexed question of Aboriginal housing.
That's right, Nick, and that's what brings us here to probably one of the most picturesque areas anywhere in Australia. It's a partnership between Forestry Tasmania and local Aboriginal groups in the Northern Territory.
This is an all too common sight in Indigenous communities across outback Australia, and for decades successive governments have tried to lift the standard of Aboriginal housing with mixed results.
2 years ago, one of the Territory's most respected Aboriginal leaders reached out to Forestry Tasmania to explore the possibility of developing a sustainable timber industry and building enterprise on Aboriginal land near Nhulunbuy on the eastern coast of the Northern Territory.
Gallery Napingu, who's the leader of the Gummidge clan, had this vision for building houses out of their own timber on their own land to act as an economic base.
We're in East Arnhem Land, mate, you know. And it's a distance to bring bricks all the way from wherever they had to come from. The timber's just there, mate, you know. And you can just go and cut them, slice them up, and that's your material, build a house.
There hasn't been much in the way of a timber industry in the Northern Territory since the missionaries shut up shop back in the 1970s, so the first step in the project is providing some hands-on training in the bush.
We've started off with basically training in the use of the sawmill. We have a good operator there, and Lindsay Birch, who's come over. He's a contractor in Tasmania. He's a guru in Lucas Mills. So we've invited Lindsay here, and he is actually training, working with the local boys and training them in the use of the mill.
Oh, I think it's been a terrific experience. Some of the best people I've ever worked with, and yeah, just a magic experience. You know, it's a challenge trying to get timber out of trees like this after, you know, our trees. But yeah, it's good.
The thing about your Lucas mill, Nick, is you can take it to the timber. It's just a matter of setting it up in the bush, then selectively harvesting the pick of the logs.
The other thing about a place like Nhulunbuy, where there is quite a bit of bauxite mining,
yes,
that's a clear fell operation where they take the trees off anyway. Now, normally those trees would just get burned,
yep,
but this way you can mill those up, make a house.
And making houses is one of the key motivations of the bush sawmilling operation, but there are obviously a range of issues to deal with in such a remote place. Greg Nolan from the University of Tasmania's School of Architecture was charged with tackling the design problems.
Well, there's a couple of key things. One is that the people were going to mill the material themselves. So there was a particular species we were working with, that beautiful red Darwin woolly butt, and it's very hard, it's very dense, so we had to design for that material. We also then had to design for cyclone conditions because it tends to blow a bit up there. And so it was a combination of what the species could do, what the conditions and the regulations would allow us to do to give us safe building, but then also a building that's a group of people with a relatively low skill and a relatively low tool set could make.
And this is the result, a simple 5-bedroom bunkhouse, primarily designed as a single man's quarters for farm workers.
It meets the Territory's tough cyclone regulations, is made of the locally sawn timber and was built by the local people. Now that building up there, which is baking under a hot Territorian sun, is typical of what you'll find in many of the Aboriginal communities around the place. It's hot, it's stuffy, and that particular one up there housed some 20 people, Nick.
It did, Hardy, and this is the new look style of housing. As you can see, all the locally sawn timber here. These are breezeways. There's one on either side of the house, and essentially all the living is outdoor, and it's also got some tricks inside as well. The first thing you notice, it's clad in pretty tough plywood, which makes it long-lasting. It's also quite breezy and cool in here, and that's due to the thought that's gone into ventilation. There is cross ventilation, louvered windows, as well as one up on the roof. In yet another Tasmanian link to the project, construction company Fairbrother provided the skills training for the building process.
Our people on the ground up there have developed a real excellent relationship with the local people. They've got a great respect there, and they've taken them on board as part of the family, and they've really enjoyed the challenges. It's been an interesting experience, but I think a good one.
So, with the first test house up and going, work has commenced on a second, more ambitious structure. A 3-bedroom home with all the usual amenities we take for granted. A design that, along with the milling operation, could be rolled out in communities right across Northern Australia.
It is an opportunity that has been given to our local people, local young men and women, eventually. It's provided an independence of a project. It's a project that anybody on any Aboriginal land can enjoy if they do have a right machineries and right equipment to do what we're doing. I think those kind of things can be done exactly the same way what we're doing.
With the first rollout of the timber milling and house building program on Aboriginal land underway near Nhulunbuy in East Arnhem Land, another Aboriginal community has decided to join the project.
Wat Air is on the western coast of the NT and has most recently come to national attention as one of the hotspots in the federal government's Aboriginal intervention policy. So this is the township of Wat Air, a place you may have heard of, a town that's had its fair share of challenges recently.
Yeah, Nick, there's plenty of issues going on here, but it's not all doom and gloom. One local community leader has thought that, well, he'll do something about it.
This idea or project came up like Tasmania Forestry, which gave me an idea, and I sat down with my family and said, look, can we try out something doing logging or building houses? How can we set up?
The answer to that question has come in the form of a portable sawmill set up on the outskirts of town. William and a crew of 6 Wat Air locals run the mill. The next step is building houses that better suit the local way of life.
Housing is a problem in Wat Air, and usually government comes up, look, this is the house and the design that you want, but the government should listen to the locals, said, look, we want to do our own design, and a lot of breezeway, more windows. And
it's going to have 4 bedrooms, a big open plan living area, but the same design with the big verandas outside so it stays cool.
To get from a mill like this, which is set up and operational, to actually being able to build a house like what we saw at Nhulunbuy out the other side, it's not really that large a step.
No, Hardy, what you need basically is about 20 cubic metres of sawn timber to build a house like that.
Yep.
And as you can see, there are literally millions and millions of hectares of standing timber around here.
And again, there's an opportunity to use timber that would otherwise be going to waste. The installation of an LNG pipeline near Wat Air resulted in the clearing of substantial amounts of timber that's now going through the mill.
already the pipeline went through country, and I've collected those logs, yes.
Idea is to make our environment nice and healthier and prettier, look better. The community had to look good, and I think the building had to look good too. It brings about a pride to people who lives in it, more to the people who builds it, because it's going to be there for a long time, and therefore it had to be appreciated that way. It's not there just temporarily. It's got to be done properly. And that's why it looks nicer. I love it.
For Forestry Tasmanian, the provision of training in the top end is part of a developing strategy to export FT skills and knowledge to the rest of the world.
In China, we've signed a major contract for about $600,000 to develop eucalypt plantations for the Chinese to grow their own timber. In Chile, we've provided some technical assistance in eucalypt silviculture. And up here, we're providing training and expertise for the Indigenous landowners here to manage their own land like they have for the last 30 or 40,000 years.
Forestry Tasmania has provided on-the-ground training for harvesting, sawmilling and regeneration operations by Aboriginal people on Aboriginal land.
UTAS and building company Fairbrother are the other Tasmanian organisations that have helped the project get off the ground.
It's worth pointing out that much of the timber being milled would have otherwise simply been burned, and so far there are 2 completed houses up and going with plans for plenty more.